And I think probably the best tip I can think of is just keep doing it, keep trying, and literally copy compositions that you see, because there's something in the muscle memory and in being able to, like, as you are sketching it from nothing into something, your brain will click with some of the understanding of, oh, that's why this goes here. Or even just that satisfying, let's say you've never drawn something like in an arc before where it ended perfectly, just doing that and then stepping back and looking at that and realizing, like, I have within me the ability to do this. That's huge.
Hey, I'm Becca with the Happy Ever Crafter, and in this week's guest interview, we're getting a little mini lesson from Dan Lee on his tips and tricks for lettering layouts. I get this question so often, and I struggle with it myself, so really excited to see his tips. Let's jump right in. I don't often record at night, but when I do, it's with Dan Lee. Dan, welcome
Much
to the show.
appreciated. It's so good to be here, Becca.
I feel like we have been internet acquaintances for a very long time, and this is the first time we're actually meeting face to face. So super happy that I finally got you to come on here.
Well, thank you again. And honestly, we're like internet ships in the night somehow. So I was like, hey, so you, oh, okay.
Yeah. I think that the first time I came across you was when I had started the Letter Archive account, and you agreed to do
Yeah.
a post for it. That was over 3 years ago, I think.
No way.
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh, geez, time
Isn't
flies,
that crazy? Yeah.
especially on the internet.
Yeah. So speaking of the internet, I want to know more about how you got into all of this, because we've chatted on Instagram, I've seen your work, but we don't really know much about each other. So tell me about like who you are, what you do, how you got into this, like the story of Dan Lee.
Totally. Okay. It's always like a bunch of like bits and pieces, and I'm like, okay, which parts of the story do you pull in? Um, I have a lettering account on Instagram, Dan Drawn Words. I started that in 2014, I think, fall of 2014. So it's been 5 years. That is nuts. And the way that that started was, for those of you who have been in Philadelphia, maybe been on the subway, there's a series of lettering murals that you can see on the subway as you're going through. I think it's like the North Philly area. And I used to have to do that as I was going to work, as part of my college degree. I was going back and forth on the subway, and I would see these giant lettering murals by Steve Espo Powers. And it just like it stuck in my brain. And after I graduated college and I was looking for what I wanted to do with my life, um, I decided to like bring a notebook and go to a coffee shop. It was a very idealistic moment. And I thought, like, what would happen if I just wandered the city and sat down with a notebook, tried to like draw something? And so I sat down, and immediately those murals came to mind. And I was like, yeah, I've always loved drawing words, but I'd never really like sat down and done it. So I think that was my first real foray into lettering as an art, was sitting down with this notebook and being like, maybe I'll just challenge myself to fill this with these like word centric art posters. That's really like the what I thought it was at the time. And so I sat down and started doing that, started posting it online. And one thing really just kind of led to another there. And I started to build a following, get featured on different things like Type Gang, Good Type, and it was just really fun to like not only to start realizing that I could have an impact, but also just to meet the people out there who were doing this. I had no idea that there was like a whole community of people who were into calligraphy and into lettering, and so that was just an enormous, wonderful discovery for me. So fast forward 5 years, I'm still doing that, on the side whenever I can. It's been really fun, and I've met some of my best friends, literally, I think around the world at this point through that. So it's been. I think that's my favorite thing about it.
That's so cool. So you just casually had a notebook and a pen, and you had no art background, and you sat down and did this, or you had a bit of an art background? Did you skip over that part?
I did kind of intentionally skip over that. It's because that's another like a whole chapter to unfold. Art was always like a hobby for me, but like a very intense hobby, if that makes sense. Like I would just go hard But I think I bought in pretty early to this like mentality of like, oh, art's just a passion. You can't really make a living out of it, you know? And so I was doing it constantly, but I went to school for something completely different, even though I was always doing like graphic design and art on the side. So I actually have a degree in chemical engineering. Uh, I did a 5-year program and got a master's. And then
And
after
now
I
you're
was
doing none of that.
done, I am doing none of that. The one cool thing I found though is that engineering particularly has like this problem solving perspective that is really helpful for a designer,
Hmm.
to be able to look at an issue and then boil down what are the parameters, like what is the area within which I can work to solve this problem, what tools do I have, and even things like what are some of the variables that I can, use and manipulate. So that's been really helpful. I found like weirdly it would like process things that I've learned in engineering will just pop up, and okay, as a designer it's been extremely helpful.
I actually think that that's really interesting. I'm glad that we went in that direction because now that you say that, thinking about what your work looks like, it makes total sense. Like your work is so like structural and meticulous and like it's always very clean and tight and it looks like somebody who has done drafting before. And
Well,
that
thank
looks
you. I
like,
can't escape it.
well, it's awesome. It's a good thing. That's why you're here. That's why I wanted you on here because we get so many questions about layouts and people struggle with it so much and it seems like something
Mm,
that comes so comes naturally to you. So I
thank
think
you.
maybe we should just like I know people want to see that lesson. So let's just do that and then we can chat more after.
Let's go. All right, guys, let's jump into the lesson here. What I've done, well, first of all, hi, you can see me in the reflection. Some of the things that I've learned can make for really fun and really engaging compositions. Start with this guy. This world needs more people like you. The lesson that I want this one to illustrate is that negative space is your friend, so stay in touch the way you would with most friends. What I've done is I've drawn some arrows to illustrate all the different margins that are going on in here, and obviously there are more. The way that everything interacts with each other is really intentional, and it helps to provide a sense of unity for the whole thing. Not everything here is totally lined up down the middle, but it still holds together, and the space being fairly consistent is one of the ways that that works. You'll also see that the style here is all a mono width sans serif, but the future examples, you're going to see there's a lot more variety that you can throw in there and still have the same sense of unity. And this note down here just says, the eye uses the margins to help it interpret order and meaning. And that's honestly the main thing that you got to keep in mind. How do you make the brain think of it as a single piece? That'll also come in handy when we're talking about different phrases within a larger composition as well. And you'll see examples of that in a second. All right, on to the second one. Here's one of the pieces from my 100 Blessings project in which I'm aiming to create 100 of these original blessings in the style of, say, old Irish prayers. So this one, as you can see, is very clearly, I even have in Procreate the vertical symmetry drawing guide on. A large part of what unifies this is that symmetry. That's a very easy, very classic way to ensure that there's enough rhythm that the eye sees to bind everything together and make it feel like one coherent piece. So what we've got here is swash integration. So I would always say to be on the lookout for ways that, once you've designed some of these ornaments, some of these swashes, and then you're like doing the lettering in between, swash integration here on the Y, also here on the S at the bottom, just the way that it ties itself perfectly into what are otherwise just ornamental shapes. You'll also notice that the letter styles here are mostly sans serif. They're mostly a mono width, but you'll see that there's, a cursive script here. And then down here, obviously, there's some variation in the mono width for say, create some differentiation even while you're combining it with the elements that already exist. On to the third piece. This is a quote from one of my favorite spoken word artists, Sarah Kay. This one says, "No matter your wreckage, there will be someone to find you beautiful." I highly recommend looking up that entire poem. I believe it's called Ghost Ship. So take a look at that. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you're looking for inspiration in things that you want to letter, especially if you're looking to practice longer quotes, highly recommend looking at poetry, opening your horizons to people maybe even that you haven't heard before, because then it can really inspire you to try something different by reading something different. Okay, so the tip here is balance by repeating styles. So this has, I've referenced this a bit in the previous two. When you're using multiple styles, it's still nice to kind of limit yourself, at least starting out, and just pick maybe 2 to 3 different styles. Here I've got, your somewhat condensed sans serif, and the second style is a monowidth script. And obviously in the middle here we have a little shorter version of the sans serif, a third element. But between the shapes and between the different styles, your brain is looking at the top, looking at the bottom, looking in between, finding patterns, and this really ties them together. It kind of puts a bow on it, like we started with this and we're ending with this. And so there's this sense of completion and a sense of integrity that you get as a result. Okay, next piece. This is an Agatha Christie quote. Curious things, habits. People themselves never knew they had them. Here's what it looks like without the notes. Here's a shortcut that I find to making compositions look really cool. Have some elements with the same flavor at the top and bottom. So even though this swash ornament here is different than this one, strictly speaking, the fact that they're the only two and there's one at the top and one at the bottom helps to provide that sense of balance in the overall composition. And then the second point here is shake it up. I like sometimes to throw in a new shape, something that just, goes up on an angle, and then find ways to put words around the sides. Goes back to the first lesson that I was talking about here, just keeping those negative space margins in mind. And that really helps guide the eye and make the whole thing feel pretty balanced. There's still a bit of space between the lines that stays fairly regular. And so that gives your brain the comfort to know that, okay, this thing is still proceeding on. There is a pattern, there's a rhythm to what I'm reading. Next lesson, Dolly frickin' Parton. This one is really just to highlight how extra shapes can add movement to a composition. All these shapes around the words, if I were to take them out, the words would probably read just fine, but there might be a little bit less cohesion to them. So this one, it really depends on the extra shapes to make it feel dynamic and fun. The different lines draw your eye. You can see the styles here we got really crazy with. This thicker one up here, obviously the big splash in the middle is this script. And then down at the bottom, the do it on purpose is just, block letters and sans serif. What really helps to make it all feel like it's one piece is the consistency of these shapes in between all of the different styles. So this one obviously is a ton of fun to look at. It was a ton of fun to make. I would just say experiment with the ways that shapes in between the words can be your friend. All right, moving right along. Number 6, healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls your life. So finding things like this that really resonate with people, that can be meaningful. Obviously, there are times when it's fun to just do fun things. Overall, I like to ask myself, is this something that is worth saying, worth repeating, worth, getting people to think about in a fresh way? Back to the technical stuff about this one. I use this to illustrate that you should vary the priority of words and phrases and then give similar priorities, similar styles. And what that means is there are certain words that, need to stand out more than others. That's pretty natural, and when you think about the structure of a sentence. Bigger words, like literally bigger words, that give it more of the heft, give it more of the meaning in a composition like this, you will want to highlight those. And so I've highlighted that healing, damage, and controls, they share the same color, they share the same general size because they are the kind of the maximum words. I think life would fall into that category as well. And then when there are smaller words, you can always shake it up, such as, the here that has the underline. Relative to the higher priority words or phrases, they can be a little bit smaller. And then the way that you choose to make the difference is totally up to you. And that's one of the fun things that I find about toying with different compositions is figuring out different types of priority indicators. Italics add immediate on-theme variety. So especially when you're using all caps block letters, you can add italics into it just to give it some visual variety without necessarily throwing in a whole new style, a cheat code, if you will. Continuing on, this is a quote that I came up with while thinking about finding ways and strategies to make sure that your headspace is in a good place. There is like self-imposed stigma, and then there also is some cultural stigma around mental health and mental illness. That's a conversation for another day, but what I'm saying here is I think do what it takes to make sure that there is a stability element in your life, and obviously this speaks for itself. So a lot of lettering is imitating calligraphy, and I think that's fine because the end result sometimes justifies the means. I have mad respect for people who do professional calligraphy, just be able to write and make the shapes look amazing without, a ton of erasing and rewriting. What we're talking about here is when you're creating ornaments and you have this script where you've just drawn it in, what you want to do is consider the vocabulary that you've created, like when things go thick, when the strokes are supposed to be thin. There's a lot of freedom in choosing where and how that works, as long as you stay consistent. So it's almost like you have to write your own rules for what the style looks like. And once you've done that, everything that you do within it, you can just play around. There's no strict rules for how to do the, swashes above the G where it's supposed to curve around itself. But generally, the bottom left or the upper right of a shape, that's where we'll get thicker, and then it'll get thinner on those upstrokes. I would obviously recommend studying calligraphy to a certain extent to just understand where these shapes come from, why they resonate with us visually, and that also will help you figure out how to break the rules creatively if you choose to do so. Okay, last but not least, this very long quote. I'm not going to read through the whole thing because that's going to take a long time. But the point of this one is sometimes, it's good to make people work to interpret what you've written, but not too hard, obviously. You can break it down into something people want to look at. So a quote like this that is about success and defining what it looks like in our lives, it's exactly the kind of quote that would make sense to, try to get people to slow down and take in each section and what it means. You'll notice the weights and the styles vary throughout this piece. I've highlighted here, there are some vertical lines that help to tell you what belongs together, as well as thick dividers horizontally, whether that's, one straight across or if it's broken up with symmetrical ornaments. And then the vertical symmetry of it, it starts with this shape at the top and a similar shape at the bottom, the arcs. Again, it speaks to the overall integrity of the piece. So what I'm going to do here is turn on this, this sections layer to show you how I've broken it down to get people to dwell in what each of these sections is saying. Considering the shapes that you can come up with in between, it almost creates mini compositions, mini stories that will get people thinking about the order of the words. Look at something that's a list, for instance, this section of 3. You can break that up into something that changes, the direction that people are reading. They're going across. Okay, now it's time to go across and down and then up. You're really getting people to slow down, and you're getting them to think about and interpret what you're saying. And it's also just a lot of fun to see the variety that you can get away with. And then at the end, it still tells a story that is all one thing. Whenever you're doing a longer composition, do whatever you can to contribute to the sense that people are looking at one piece, not just a bunch of different words. One way that is really helpful is to zoom out frequently and think about the shape that you've created. There are a lot of other considerations that you can have when putting together these compositions. I just wanted to hit some of the high-level ones that came to mind for how I pursue mine, and yeah, thanks for tuning in on that.
Okay, so a couple things about your lesson that I want to go deeper into, and the first one is that I love what you said about at the end kind of zooming out on your composition and seeing the overall shape of it without looking at things so closely. And I think that's really interesting. And also it reminded me of sort of the opposite thing that I learned at the Letter West retreat this year. I was sitting down with Eric Marinovich, and he was talking about sort of the opposite, where he looks at things really zoomed in. So he'll look at like 3 letters at a time instead of the whole word or the whole composition. And I found that really helpful. So like maybe a combination of both, zoom out and see it as a whole, and then zoom really tight in is a cool tip.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. It's like making sure that you're always, in some ways, it's almost like you're tricking your brain, but that means that every time you're zooming in and you're zooming out, you have a fresh perspective and you're able to like think about, okay, this needs to go here. Then when you zoom back in, you're not just so used to doing it that now you can really focus on like the spacing and the micro details. I love that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, do you have any notebooks that have like really beginner work in it?
I don't in Sheridan. They're all at home in Philadelphia, but I do have a bunch. And I think I have, oh man, I'll have to dig them up. Maybe I'll post them somewhere.
Does your
I have
Instagram
like
have really old stuff at the bottom of it?
It's got some pretty old stuff. It's got like 2015 old stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go down there if you dare.
All right. Will do. So right now, do you do most of your stuff on the iPad? Like how has that changed the way you work, especially in terms of compositions and layouts? Because I feel like it's a different process with an iPad.
It is. It is. I do. Yeah, most of it will be on the iPad, mainly because the time that I have, or the time that I dedicate to it, it's usually like in between pockets, like sitting down for lunch break, and it just makes it so much easier when you can undo and copy and paste instead of like erasing and redrawing. That being said, I really do love pencils in notebooks. Like something about that tactile sensation, and when you make it work, it almost feels more satisfying sometimes.
Totally.
But
yeah.
I think the iPad with pencil brushes and stuff, it approximates that a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, just being able to use layers makes it really easy to, create the layout outlines and pivot really quickly. So if something's going in a weird direction, I'm just not feeling it, rather than pulling out the eraser and going all over. I can just be like, okay.
Do you ever find yourself double tapping paper now? You always feel like such an idiot when you do that.
It's so embarrassing.
Oh, that's funny.
I have done it more times than I can count.
Yeah.
It's like it's such a reflex too. You're just like, ah.
You're like looking around. Nobody saw that. Okay.
I was watching.
So Dan, let's say, okay, I know in your lesson we looked at some, like, I feel like there are people watching this who looked at those layouts and they were like, oh my God, I could never do this. Like I think I have a lot of beginners in the audience who have written like 1 or 2 words together, but never like a big composition. So if you had to go back to like beginner Dan who didn't know how to do any of this, and maybe this is a bad question because you have that engineering background, but what would be your advice to a beginner who's like totally overwhelmed and paralyzed by this and isn't even thinking about the little tips you gave us, but just like how to start in general?
Yeah, great. I would say, first of all, go get an engineering degree. I'm just kidding. Done. Just do that. It's great. Let's see. Remember, I think it would be really good to remember that, like, keeping it, like, at the end of the day, even the most complex things follow very basic rules. So keeping in mind that, like, something small can still be very beautiful, and never, like, I guess it almost goes to a more philosophical obstacle. There's this fear of trying the harder thing, trying the more complex thing, because we can be like, I'm going to try it. It's going to not look great. And then I'm going to feel like I can never do it and I'll give up. And I think probably the best tip I can think of is just keep doing it, keep trying, and literally copy compositions that you see, because there's something in the muscle memory and in being able to, like, as you are sketching it from nothing into something, your brain will click with some of the understanding of, oh, that's why this goes here, or even just that satisfying, let's say you've never drawn something like in an arc before where it ended perfectly, just doing that and then stepping back and looking at that and realizing like I have within me the ability to do this, that's huge. So
Mm-hmm.
don't give up, copy the other stuff, and then just keep trying, just keep experimenting. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, I like that. Also, like, yeah, so anybody watching, just go copy all of Dan's layouts and then post them as your own and make money off of
There
them,
you
right? That's
go.
what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, just sell my work. It's cool. It's fine. I'm cool with that. I'm not cool with that, just for the record. Let's
No, don't.
that's right.
Don't do that. Please don't do that.
But I will
Um,
say, in your notebooks, in your iPads, in things that you're not like saying, "Hey, I totally did this 100%." I think it's like fair game. And I'm pretty sure that's what they do, like in art schools, right? Like when they have people go and copy masterful or the master's paintings.
mm-hmm.
Disclaimer here: I'm also not calling my work the master's painting. But I know that I have a variety of things, and I try a lot of different compositional styles. And so if you ever want to just go and trace that and work it out on your own just to see how it feels, please be
Mm-hmm.
my guest.
You just gave your advice for beginners, but are there any like resources that you can think of that were really valuable to you when you first started doing this, specifically like to help with layout stuff?
Hmm. I'm trying to think back because it's been such a long time. I think when I started out, I was doing a lot of figuring out on my own. Because I think I just didn't know what was out there. So a lot of the things that I've encountered were kind of later in the game that I think still would have been really helpful. So if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Stefan Kunz and Ian Barnard. They have
Mm-hmm.
these lettering grids that you can use. Those are awesome. Those are really helpful. I used them in a collaboration recently, and it was great. It was almost literally like I need to stay in my lane, and it is these three parts of the composition. And ultimately, like it turns out looking seamless. It's awesome.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it takes a lot of the work out for you for sure.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. So I would recommend that. Brushes by Shauna. Her last name I will not try to pronounce here, but she goes by Shauna Parmesan
Okay.
on the socials. I love her brushes. There's also a gal named Inky Pixels. I think her name is Kelly, but Inky Pixels is her handle, and she has some Procreate brushes that. And the reason I'm pitching brushes here as tools for that is because literally, like when you're drawing, the way that something feels and kind of unfolds as you go, I honestly think has a huge motivating or demotivating factor based on like how tangible or like how I guess it's hard to explain, but it's just a feeling of it. And so really good, really fun brushes like that, I find just really help to stimulate the creativity and motivate some of the work that I do. So I highly recommend those. I hope that
Cool.
answers the question, like
Yeah,
on
for sure. Yeah.
resources.
Yep. Okay. We are on to the lightning round.
Oh boy.
Okay, ready?
I'm not nervous. This is
Um,
fine.
are you a morning person or a night owl?
I am a morning person with night owl tendencies.
Okay.
I am always
Uh,
mad when I can't wake up early, but because I love it, but I also just find myself doing art late into the night.
so you don't sleep. Okay. If you could only use one type of pen for the rest of your life, Apple Pencil excluded, what would it be?
There's a Pentel Fude Touch pen, Fude. It's like a brush pen. Oh, it's so beautiful. That's the one for
Okay.
sure.
What's something you hate that everyone else loves?
Ooh. Oh, I'm gonna get so many. Oh, okay, never mind. Frozen, the movie, Frozen 1.
Okay. Good to
Disclaimer, I
know.
love Frozen 2.
Wow. Interesting. I haven't seen either,
Big,
but I will have that perspective in my mind now when I watch them. What's the last meal you ate?
a bag of Jimmy John's jalapeno chips.
Okay. It's not a meal, but I'll let you
That's
go
all
with
I've
it.
eaten today. Don't tell my mom.
Okay. Hopefully she won't see this. If you had to go without a ruler forever or an eraser forever, which would you choose?
Oh, ruler.
Yeah.
I think there's so many other things in life that are like straight enough that you could be like, I'll use this instead.
True. True. Who is your biggest art crush?
Oh, man, there are categories to this. But the one I'll pick is, do you know Josh Noom? By any chance, Joshua Noom, Noom. Go
Okay.
check out his work after this. It's just the stuff of inspiration is the
Okay.
best way I can put it. That
All
guy
right.
for sure.
Okay. Well, we'll go check him out. But more importantly, where can people find you?
They can find me either hanging out here in Sheridan, so come visit if you're ever in Wyoming. Um, and online, my Instagram handle is Dan Drawn Words.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for coming on here. I'm really excited for people to see all of these tips because I know how much people struggle with layouts, myself included, and I know that they'll help a lot. So appreciate you
Thank you
coming
so
on.
much, Becca. It truly is my pleasure.
It was nice to finally meet you after whatever, 3-4 years now.
Likewise.